Good afternoon, and welcome to the final talk in our exploration series of events, generously sponsored by the MasterCard program provided by our affinity partner, BMO. My name is Jessica Lounsbury with the Office of Alumni Engagement here at McMaster. Thank you all for joining us. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that the land on which McMaster and this webinar is taking place is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. At McMaster, we start our events with a land acknowledgement to show both respect to Indigenous peoples and their enduring connection with their traditional territories and its histories, and as an important step in reconciliation. I would now like to introduce our guest speaker, McMaster alumna Cassidy Bereskin. Cassidy is the founder and director of the Oxford Generative AI Summit, an annual multi-stakeholder expert convening on generative AI and society. She is also a PhD researcher and Clarendon Scholar at the Oxford Internet Institute, University of Oxford, researching the efficacy of content disclosure interventions for combating synthetic visual dis- and misinformation. She is also a visiting fellow at the Center for Governance on AI, as well as the author of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association's Parliamentary Handbook on Disinformation, AI, and Synthetic Media, and has presented on interventions for tackling mis- and disinformation in the area of deepfakes and generative AI to policymakers, diplomats, corporate leaders, and other experts around the world. Previously, Cassidy founded and directed the Oxford Synthetic Media Forum, worked on the Alan Turing Institute's online safety team, and analyzed data at the Vox Pops lab in Canada. She holds a master's with distinction from the Oxford Internet Institute and a BA from McMaster University, where she graduated as a valedictorian. If you have a question for our speaker today, you can type it in the Ask a Question section below, and we will have some time at the end to answer a few. Here, joining us from the UK today to discuss generative AI opportunities and societal impacts, please welcome Cassidy.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for the introduction, and to McMaster University for inviting me to speak to you all today. I wish that I could be at McMaster in person and look forward to coming back to Canada very soon. Good afternoon to you all, and good evening, I guess, here where I am in the UK. Yeah, reflecting on my experiences over the past couple of years and as a McMaster alum, I feel incredibly grateful for the impact that McMaster's professors and staff, students, and the community have had on my academic career, my personal career, and just kind of, the last couple of years has really been shaped by my experiences at McMaster. And some of the things that I got involved with were the Digital Society Lab led by Dr. Clifton van der Linden, where I got to work on a lot of exciting projects that are focused on using technology to improve civic engagement and promote democracy. And I was also involved in some research and working with some of the professors, including Dr. Natina Tan and Dr. Tony Porter, who set up the Digital Democracy Research Hub. And through that experience, I got exposure to issues around dis and misinformation and deepfakes, and that experience really alerted me to these significant issues and what propelled me to then apply to study at the Oxford Internet Institute. So these experiences led me to my PhD research, and also to Oxgen AI, which is the organization that I started to run the Oxford Generative AI Summit. So this summit, which I hosted over the past, our last one was this past October, and I have hosted this summit annually over the past couple of years. And the main goal is to convene all these different stakeholder groups, so enterprise, startups, academics, government, media, civil society, and bring everybody together, because I think the current moment that we're in is incredibly exciting and also incredibly terrifying. And there's significant opportunity, which I want to talk about when it comes to generative AI, and also significant societal implications that we need to grapple with as our lives and our societies are becoming increasingly shaped and transformed by AI. And there's a lot of uncertainty right now around where the current moment is. A lot of people, including myself, believe that it's basically the 1998 equivalent of what it was in the early days of the internet, that we're really in the early days of this age of AI. But how it plays out and will impact so much of our lives is unclear. And that's why we need dialogue to bring different stakeholder groups together to explore and think critically about how AI is right now and is increasingly in the future going to impact us. Before I get into some of that, some more information about that, I think it's useful to contextualize generative AI and sort of explain, definitionally what I'm talking about before I dive into it further. In her 2020 book called Deepfakes, Nina Schick, who's an expert in this area, warned that, quote, soon anyone with a smartphone will be able to produce Hollywood-level special effects at next to no cost with minimum skill or effort. So she wrote this in her book in 2020, which I came across and was very concerned and excited also that we have Hollywood at our fingertips, but also concerned about the weaponization of that. And 4 years later, we see that her prediction has really come to life in many ways, and we now see hyper-realistic, AI-generated or synthetic text, audio, images, videos, code, combinations of content, synthetic people that could appear in a meeting room with you. These are increasingly accessible and indistinguishable from reality in many cases. And generative AI is a type of AI models that are capable of generating or producing content. And this is kind of, in my opinion, one of the biggest advances and stepwise changes from more traditional or earlier forms of AI, the main one being discriminative AI, where if you have a large amount of data where you have some images that are cats and some images that are not cats, an AI model that can classify what is a cat and what isn't, and make predictions based on this data has been available for some time and has had many really exciting use cases, such as for medical diagnosis as an example, and machine learning is incredibly powerful, and there's a lot of significant research being done in this area and at McMaster and more broadly to leverage machine learning. And when I talk about generative AI, which is what my summit principally focuses on, is AI models that can not only classify or predict what is the sort of what is a cat or what is a dog. It is models that can produce content and also increasingly make downstream decisions on our behalf, such as maybe writing our software, booking flights for us, making incredibly complex and autonomous decisions are sort of where a lot of people believe that models like ChatGPT, which many of you use regularly, or other models that have really proliferated. There's so many different Gen AI models where you can interact with it and have a lot of highly sophisticated content that can be useful for you. So increasingly, these models are getting more and more capable. We don't know exactly where their limits are, and there's a lot of disagreement about that. But this is broadly the type of AI that I'm focusing on, and through organizing different ways to bring people together to think about how it's impacting society. So synthetic media is also a term that comes up a lot in my research and in a lot of policy discussion, and that refers to the actual outputs of content and mostly tends to focus on audio visual content. So things like photos or videos where you see a celebrity or politician maybe saying something or doing something that they might not have actually done. That is what I'm referring to when I say deepfake, and it's a type of synthetic media. But synthetic media could also be consensual. So maybe a CEO of a company that wants to use their image and voice and presentation to have to make an announcement in a sort of short format way, but maybe in the past it would have taken a couple hours to film something, to have the proper equipment, to do the editing, and now you can kind of license your voice, your image, your likeness, either with your consent, or increasingly this is being misused in the form of non-consensual deepfakes. So there's a lot of different forms of synthetic media. It often this refers to the actual content outputs, often audio-visual content. So that's, yeah, just to kind of give you some a sense of what I'm talking about when I use some of these different terms. What is the discourse and the conversation globally, and where I'm based in Oxford around generative AI in the current moment? Number one, there's a lot of excitement both about generative AI in practice today, as well as the transformative potential of generative AI. And I think, yeah, one of the key insights from our recent summit is that the current moment feels incredibly transformative. And I think a recent achievement that is a testament to this is the Nobel Prize that was recently awarded to some of the eminent researchers in the field. For one of them, Demis Hassabis, who's a CEO of and founder of Google DeepMind, is AlphaFold, which is a groundbreaking AI program developed by Google DeepMind, which can predict protein structures from amino acid sequences. And it has a lot of massive implications for things like drug discovery and vaccine development, and yeah, has been bringing a lot of excitement to the field, both in terms of how it can be used to better understand how proteins work, but also showing that Gen AI can have really transformative potential. And there's also a lot of excitement in terms of the transformativeness of the moment around things like the term agentic AI is used increasingly to refer to AI systems that can act autonomously and make decisions and execute tasks on the behalf of individuals, such as maybe as simple as scheduling a meeting, which now I think even with ChatGPT and a lot of the latest tools, I find for myself, I'm still, I use Calendly a lot sort of as a personal anecdotal thing, but I think that AI is increasingly making things more efficient day to day, but there's still, I think, a lot there, such as, yeah, really seamlessly setting up a meeting that maybe it's not fully there yet, but I think, and people feel excited about the optimism of maybe soon it will be, and yeah, handling customer inquiries, maybe even helping to book flights or something like that. Although, as I'll talk about in the next kind of section of this presentation, there are also a lot of shortcomings right now of these models in terms of trust and bias and things that we're trying to figure out in terms of understanding how they actually work, and to make sure that when people are relying on them for decisions that are important, that they can get things right. So yeah, so caveat, but this is just to say there's a lot of there's significant excitement right now, and I think because of that, there's this broader gold rush in the field, because there is a common belief that, and this has really really borne out over the past few years, is that if you can secure as many chips as you can, the hardware and the power contracts that make it possible to train and test these AI systems, which are incredibly massive. If you can do that, then that might lead to performance gains in terms of the actual models being more and more sophisticated. So there's this kind of geopolitical, these geopolitical tensions and incentives that are really at play to try to win the AI race. So there's a lot of geopolitics involved as well, and there's a sense of yeah, that's informed largely by the perception that this is a truly transformative technology for our world. And a caveat at the same time is there's a lot of optimism about it. There are a lot of roadblocks still in terms of, for example, these models are trained on or basically informed by and leverage all of the information on the internet. And then at a very high level, they work by predicting based on this like massive amount of data, what is the next most likely word that could be generated based on all of the information that it has been trained on or that it learns from, essentially. So some people have raised concerns saying that we're out of data. We're hitting a data wall. That's one of the arguments. It's incredibly expensive, also computationally and environmentally, to train these models, and there may be limits, like in terms of the hardware and the actual minerals that are needed for those chips to be able to train these models. So there's a huge, I think there's a significant feeling of transformative excitement, but it's tempered by some serious uncertainties and potential bottlenecks. So that is on the transformative side. And then on the practical side, I think there's a lot of excitement also about how Gen AI is in practice right now, how it's being used, and there's so many incarnations of this in our daily lives. In terms of, I suspect a lot of you use some of these models very, very regularly for a range of different kind of use cases. Entire fields are really being impacted and seeing a lot of efficiency gains and also use cases that they weren't necessarily thinking about before that now have been made possible because of generative AI. And also some that, this might tie nice into the discussion around the societal implications, some that are a little bit more polarizing, such as we had a speaker at our most recent summit who's a prominent influencer originally coming from the esports world, who has over 20 million subscribers on his YouTube. And he's basically essentially completely automated his videos at this point. So he has a channel running and he uses a variety of different models and software to create like a pipeline to edit. And as a result, his time is really freed up, and he discloses to his audience that he is using AI. And his thesis in the presentation was it's quality, not authenticity or personality, that people really care about. And if you want to search on YouTube how to make pasta, you don't really care about the personality of the person telling you that. So his kind of view on that is like, for his use case of what his audience is looking for, the use of generative AI makes sense. But it also is a polarizing kind of conversation, because maybe there are some areas where the personality and the relationship that's formed between the YouTuber and the audience, or in any other kind of context as well, that AI might be sort of crowding out some intrinsic value and an intrinsic really important relationship between the performer and audience. So there's a lot to be said about that. But for the purpose of use cases and opportunity, that is an example of one. And marketing and content creation are seeing a lot of are really integrating generative AI in practice increasingly. Things like sales and outreach, as well as an industry, is seeing a lot of scalability also, and efficiency gains through Gen AI. And something that I also feel really excited about is around code development, and companies like Google are reporting 55% less time needed to understand code and a 50% reduction in unit test writing. And it's exciting to me because it means that the barrier to entry to create software is lower. And if there are people that can enter and build really cool things that are going to make the world better, when previously it would have just been programmers that were empowered and able to do this, then that's exciting to me, because I think there's a lot of very exciting ways that technology can be used to make the world better. And content analysis as well, where AI can take, the key is really large, diverse, and clean data sets. And when you can take data and make it meaningful and useful for an organization across different types of sectors and organizations, from nonprofits and startups through to enterprise, there's a lot of value tangibly that people and organizations are getting from generative AI right now. So transformativeness, use cases today, but there's also a lot of things to be concerned about and worried about, both in the short term and long term. And I think today, particularly, there is a lot to talk about. And my research, and this is especially true as landmark regulation is being shaped and comes into force. And there are a lot of things to talk about here. I'll kind of go deep a bit on what my research is looking at, but I want to say there's a whole range of things that could be talked about, from the environmental dimensions of generative AI and the energy consumption required, to data privacy, global inequalities, bias, and the future of work as well. So there's a lot to talk about, which I won't have the time to get into, but my PhD research looks at ways to alert people to misinformation, deepfakes, and what is now often called AI sludge. And dis and misinformation usually refer to false and misleading content. And a really big issue that people here probably have encountered quite often is what is called hallucinations, where the AI models make things up, and they can sound incredibly plausible and highly convincing, even though they're complete fabrications. And that has created an impetus to look for techniques to fix these issues at the level of the models, but also AI generated content is making its way online and becoming really, really pervasive. And I want to just, I'll share my screen and show you some examples. An AI sludge refers to very low quality AI generated content. Basically, that's just kind of made its way online. And I'll just share my screen quickly. So you should be able to see it here. Let me see if I can make it to the screen. Maybe not, but you hopefully should be able to see it. So this was a website. This is AI Sludge. It's a fake ad for this Dublin Halloween parade in Ireland. This is just an example from a couple weeks ago, where this was a completely fake. There's a lot of incentives to use AI sludge to make money, and there's a lot of clickbait and fake content that is proliferating. But the big problem is this can really impact the people's behavior and the real world. And I'll go to the next slide. That it actually went viral on TikTok and some other platforms where people thought it was legit, and hundreds gathered in Dublin for this parade, but it was AI generated, and they were just kind of standing there, and there wasn't anything to celebrate. So this is just it's a maybe slightly a little bit more of an innocuous example perhaps, but I think when you can have when there's AI sludge and also overt misinformation and deepfakes, it can be really harmful. And an example of that is there was an election in Slovakia. I mean, a lot of elections over the past year, and this was the first year I think where AI really figured prominently in elections. And I think as a social scientist myself, it'll take a long time before we really understand what is the impact of AI and deepfakes on the outcomes or people's beliefs and how they inform voting decisions and also the discourse, and public discourse around it. So it's very uncertain. But I think a case over the past year that was quite alarming to me was in Slovakia, where the Progressive Slovakia Party leader was implicated in a deepfake. It was actually an audio recording of him speaking to a journalist saying, "We're going to buy votes and rig the election." And it sounded exceedingly realistic, went viral, and that was during the 48-hour silence period right before the election. So his party couldn't really come back and officially make a statement to respond to that. So that's an example where maybe we don't know the exact impact that had on the voting outcome, even though his party lost. But it's still a nefarious use where it's misrepresenting somebody's actions and beliefs and can be extremely harmful. Another I'll share my screen again. I think it's the next slide. This is for the academics here is something also to be cautious of and thinking about, because this is an example of a completely fake publication from recently, the last couple of weeks, where this is, I came across it in a newsletter because it's an AI related publication. Somebody was in that newsletter actually mentioning that this was fake. But I think when you kind of see the presentation, it looks like it could be legit. And then you really have to think critically about if you see, like there was an author listed on one of the publications that was tied to a piece on e-commerce, but he doesn't do anything related to e-commerce. So then the context can help you to separate the fact from fiction. But often the aesthetics, and as AI models get better, they can sound increasingly plausible and convincing. And I think that's the aspect that does worry me a lot. Give me one second. Yes. So in terms of the features, I think a big question around misinformation is what is really new here, because people have lied for a long time. People have tried to make money. There's a lot of clickbait already. But what is really new, and why should we care about the role of AI in sort of turbocharging some of these existing issues? And I feel that AI, and I think a lot of people believe that AI has made these pre-existing issues a lot more accessible, efficient, and scalable, to just be able to generate like thousands of lines of code or text in a way, like just making it cheaper and easier than ever before to contribute to some of these issues. And also the hyper-realism around deepfakes looking virtually indistinguishable. The personalization and hyper-targeting as well. And also something called the liar's dividend, which refers to the fact that anybody can weaponize broad public skepticism around AI-generated content and say, oh, that was a deepfake, it wasn't me, and sort of get off the hook for something that they actually did do or say. So these are some things that I think are a stepwise increase in terms of making misinformation and related issues even something more turbocharged in the age of generative AI. So then I want to end with sort of a more optimistic note of how do we address these issues. And I do feel like I think there's a lot of excitement, a lot of opportunity, and I think that's incredible. And there's also a lot of concern and societal implications. And the way forward is to have multi-stakeholder dialogue, like we do engage through our summit, and develop tools, policy, multi-layered approaches, and ways to address and mitigate the adverse effects of these systems. And an example of a project to try to mitigate the effects of AI sludge is called Wiki Project AI Cleanup, which was recently announced by Wikipedia as a collaboration to combat the increasing problem of unsourced, poorly written AI generated content on Wikipedia. So there are projects underway to try to clean up the internet as much as we can. There's also something, a tool that I came across a couple of years ago that I got the opportunity to help to work on the user experience related to the presentation of this tool. It's the organization that developed the standard for it is called the C2PA, or the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. And they started a couple years ago. A lot of major companies are involved, including, it was started originally by Adobe and Microsoft, with the New York Times, BBC, and a couple camera manufacturers. And the main goal of the project was to develop a nutrition label, kind of, I think that's the best analogy to think about it, that overlays each visual or audiovisual piece of content and has a chain of information about was this image AI generated or was it human generated? When was it produced? Who created this? How does it, who, what, where, when, why? How does it kind of move through the internet? All at the level of metadata, or like ingredients related to the content, so that you have more transparency around where something has come from. And they started that in 2021. I came across it in a year later and decided for my master's thesis, I would run a study to try to understand how people respond to these kind of labels overlaying our content. And now I'm running a larger study to test out the comparative effectiveness of a variety of different types of tools that are aimed at helping people to reduce their susceptibility to AI generated misinformation. And we already have a lot of tools in our toolkit, such as things like fact checks, or on Twitter community notes, the C2PA, or they call them content credentials. This nutrition label is a relatively new one, and is now starting to be used and deployed quite widely by like on Instagram, on TikTok, a variety of other platforms are really just starting now to try to roll these out as one. This is sort of one tool of many that we need to try to foster responsible AI and more transparency in our content. So yeah, I think I want to just end by saying that these kinds of tools are not really it's not a silver bullet. There are a lot of challenges, and many that I wasn't able to touch on as much today. But I think it's an example of an effort that is aimed at trying to increase transparency and foster an information ecosystem where we can mitigate some of the adverse effects of and adverse societal implications and challenges that arise from generative AI. So I think I'll end there and pass it back to Jessica to kick off the Q&A.
That's wonderful, Cassidy. Thank you. Very interesting and very informative. I think there's a lot to learn about AI as it becomes more prevalent in our society today. So this is a great starting point for all of our viewers today. So thank you. We do have a few questions and a couple minutes for questions here. So I will start off by asking the first one here. How can people protect themselves from becoming a deep fake? Thinking in terms of politicians, civic leaders, or celebrities. Is there a way that people can protect themselves from becoming one?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think this sobering reality right now is not really, unless there's pressure put, and there's a lot of regulatory pressure put on the major AI developers and the companies that are that can allow you to make deepfakes. So maybe OpenAI, as an example, with Dolly 3, if you try to make a deepfake of myself or a politician or anybody, it will, because of their own policies and technical ways to restrict what content it can reveal to people. It restricts you from doing that, so you wouldn't be able to use a platform like that. But there is a pretty a vibrant open source ecosystem where people can run models other than that on their own servers, and you can there are ways to get around that, and there are also other companies out there where you can make deepfakes a bit more easily. So I think a key piece of that will be regulatory pressure and safeguards in place. But also on the other, because of the current reality, I think the onus is really on us and also other platforms and responsible AI organizations that not only try to spot and detect what is AI generated, but also to prove what is real and what you can trust. And that's C2PA is part of that effort as well, to try to identify when it is a credible photo of a politician or a photo taken by a photojournalist, and there's a sort of stamp of authenticity. I think these efforts are increasingly important, as well as we sort of exist now in an information environment where there's a sort of that seeing is no longer believing, and there's sort of a distrust by default that is starting to happen now, I think.
Yeah, that's great. And just to follow up to that question, sort of along the same lines, do you envision at some point where AI can be used to counteract malicious AI so that deepfakes and misinformation can be spotted so people don't end up going to a fake parade like your example you showed?
Mm-hmm. Where AI can be used. Yeah, I really do believe that this technology always is dual purpose, where it can both inform and empower and mislead and deceive people. And I think that there's a lot of exciting work to try to use AI for good, to improve our democracy and the way that, and it could automate or be used. I think we will always need a human in the loop in some way until some of these key issues like hallucinations get fixed. But I think something like fact checking, I could really see AI, and it already is playing an increasing role in that. So even though there's higher scalability around misinformation being able to be produced at scale, we can also use that same power of the technology to try to counteract the misinformation with more scalable fact checking, as an example.
We have another question here. The New York Times has sued OpenAI and Microsoft for the unpermitted use of New York Times article to train ChatGPT. How do you see cases like that one shaping AI generated content in the future?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think all these cases, from what I like, to my knowledge, a lot of them are underway in the courts and will move through the courts, and it will have a lot of intellectual property implications. But it also looks like at the same time there's been a lot of partnerships and licensing deals that are being made between the AI providers and these companies to basically pay them to compensate them to be able to train their models, or to use their content as training data for their models. So I think these are kind of the two ways that this seems to be playing out right now. And I guess it's sort of up in the air, would be my unfortunately kind of sobering answer to that.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for two more questions here. So you had mentioned regulation. What are the chances government will start passing legislations around misuse of AI tools like deepfakes? Or have they already started passing legislations in certain parts of the world?
Yes, increasingly. Yes, I think AI, part of, I think some of the regulation around this has already pre-existed the ChatGPT development, where there's a lot of regulation, especially I guess being based in the UK now, in the EU, that has really played a major leadership role around trying to reduce misinformation during like things like elections, um, where there are, I think there are certain things that platforms may or may not be able to do around things like certain like types of political ads during elections, and like there's a variety of sort of policy mechanisms that predate this kind of these questions around AI, but are still useful as regulation. And then also the EU AI Act. I think the US and the EU really have taken a global leadership role in it when it comes to AI governance in recent years. The EU recently passed the EU AI, or the I always mix up the commission and the council and sort of how the actual process works. But the EU AI Act just came into force pretty recently, and there's something called the codes of practice that are being developed over this year, and those codes will determine how the EU AI Act actually gets implemented and what the guidelines are. Right now, it's there is a transparency requirement that basically says that AI providers need to disclose the use of AI that to people, such that people know that they're interacting with an AI generated system, and that's pretty broad, and it doesn't necessarily distinguish between things like the AI developer, like maybe OpenAI, versus a deployer like a social media platform where that content might be passed through. So I think there's a lot that will need to be worked out around the sort of pipeline of AI generated content, and the accountability and responsibility there. And then in the US, there was an executive order Biden passed, or he issued the executive order last year to basically do these kinds of things, but Trump has said that he would overturn that. So I think that the regulatory landscape around AI in the US will probably shift quite dramatically in the next couple months or so.
Okay, and we've got time for one more question here. So I have a question asking or saying AI has wonderful potential, as you had mentioned, in the sciences. If a young person is looking at future careers, will all professions use some kind of AI, do you foresee?
Yeah, I mean that's a big question. If all professions will use some kind of AI, I believe that while AI will be prevalent everywhere and useful in so many aspects of our lives, there are certain types of jobs. This is just my own opinion, necessarily not informed by my research, but I recently got into to fitness over the past couple years. It's been an important part of my routine, and I don't use like Peloton or YouTube for classes. I love just going and like actually being in the class, seeing the instructor, like the energy that comes from being surrounded by people. And I do believe that there will always be, like, there might be some jobs where like AI, maybe it could be useful, like all the knowledge of the internet is sort of at our fingertips, and I could do my own workout without using. I could use AI for my workouts, but there's a reason I don't. So I wouldn't say all professions, but I think a lot of them, when there's efficiency gains that can be made, that also will not undermine the sort of the fundamental kind of quality of the type of relationship of that or experience that happens through that type of work.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And Cassidy, thank you so much for taking the time to give this fascinating talk this afternoon or evening in the UK where you are. For all of our viewers out there, the talk was recorded, and if you would like to rewatch it or share it with a friend, a link to the recording will be sent to all registered guests in a follow-up email later this afternoon. In that email, there'll also be a link to a quick survey. If you could kindly take a few minutes of your time and share your feedback with us, we'd greatly appreciate it. This was our final talk in our exploration series of events. If you're looking for more upcoming events with the Alumni Office, you can visit our website at alumni.mcmaster.ca/events. So Cassidy, thank you once again for taking time out of your day to come and speak with us this evening. And to all of our viewers out there, we hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you.